What happens when a 12,000-year-old galactic empire writes you off as harmless? They looked at us, with our soft skin, no claws, and ridiculously short lives, and they laughed. In a chamber big enough to hold 847 species, humanity was considered a joke. The final judgment was cold and dismissive. Pre-ascendant class, no threat, approved for integration. That was our death sentence, wrapped in bureaucratic boredom. 3 weeks later, 47 alien warships sliced through our solar system, and the voice that boomed across every screen on the planet wasn't here to talk. It was here to dictate. People of Earth, it said, you will surrender all military assets. You have one planetary rotation to comply. But Earth had a one-word answer: number. So the aliens, the Valari, decided to teach us a lesson. Right at midnight, 3 pinpoint beams of light shot down from the sky, hitting Mumbai, Sao Paulo, and Chicago. In less than 3 seconds, 37 million human beings were just gone. And out in the galaxy, nobody blinked. It was just business as usual. To them, we were just another loud, primitive species being put in its place. But on Earth, something started happening that the Galactic Council had never, ever seen before. Humanity didn't break. Humanity didn't beg for mercy. Humanity just went quiet. But it wasn't the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of something much, much scarier. It was the quiet of cold, patient, and absolute rage. And while our invaders celebrated their easy victory, and the Council filed away another boring report, while the entire universe wrote Earth off as a finished chapter, humanity was getting ready to teach the stars a lesson they would never, ever forget. The Galactic Council chamber was an impossible structure floating between 3 dead stars, a monument to a rigid peace that had lasted 12,000 years. Inside, delegates from 847 species debated the fate of worlds. Ambassador Krelvax, a towering creature with skin like wet stone, stood before them. His species, the Valari, were the Council's muscle. They called them integration specialists. Our survey team has returned from Sector 7742. Krelvax announced, his voice echoing. They've located a new species on the 3rd planet of a yellow star. The natives call their world Earth. The High Speaker, a being of pure light, simply said, "Show us." A hologram of our beautiful blue and green world filled the room. The image zoomed in, showing our cities, our cars, and us. To them we were tiny, no natural weapons, laughably short lives, and we'd split our little world into almost 200 tribes that were constantly squabbling. Their technology is primitive, Krelvax continued with a sneer. They fight each other over dirt and ideas. Soft laughter echoed through the ancient hall. Your assessment? The High Speaker asked. Pre-ascendant Class 7. Standard integration protocols will be more than enough. They are no threat. The High Speaker paused. The Valari Dominion requires new territory. Does anyone object? The silence was unanimous. This was routine. A new species gets brought into the fold, willing or not. The galaxy moves on. Authorization granted, the High Speaker declared. Proceed with the integration. Try not to break too much of the infrastructure. Krelvax gave a deep bow. The Dominion is grateful. He was actually excited. His younger warriors were getting restless, and this would be a simple, clean conquest to boost morale. 3 weeks later, the Valari fleet arrived. There were 47 ships, the smallest being the size of an aircraft carrier. Krelvax's flagship could swallow a city whole. On Earth, panic erupted. Every telescope and radar on the planet screamed at the sight. The United Nations scrambled, but what could they do against ships that defied physics? Krelvax's message hijacked every screen on Earth. People of Earth, I am Ambassador Krelvax. By the authority of the Galactic Council, your world is now under our jurisdiction. This is not a negotiation. Surrender all military assets. Resistance will have consequences. You have 24 hours to comply." The message ended, leaving the world in stunned silence. But the answer came surprisingly fast, in 100 different languages from 100 different nations, and it was the same exact word. No. Krelvax wasn't even annoyed. He expected it. A little demonstration was in order. He picked 3 cities, big enough to make a point. At exactly midnight, the beams struck. Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Chicago. 37 million souls vaporized. Where homes once stood, there were now just glassy craters. Krelvax appeared on the screens again. "You were warned. You now have 12 hours. And then the governments of Earth stopped responding entirely. Far away, the Galactic Council filed the report. Earth's integration was proceeding as planned. Another day, another primitive species learning its place. But something unprecedented was happening on our planet. In secret bunkers, mortal enemies were sharing everything. For the first time in history, bitter rivals shared their most guarded secrets, passing launch codes for weapons that had been aimed at each other for generations. Researchers who once fought over grants and prestige now collaborated, their personal ambitions completely forgotten. In the smoldering ruins of one city, a young woman dragged her little brother from under a collapsed building, whispering a promise that someone would answer for this. Half a world away, an old man who'd seen empires rise and fall stared at the scarred sky and started to make a plan. And in the skeletal remains of another town, a firefighter who had lost everyone she loved strode into a makeshift army post, asking one simple question: "How can I help?" In that single moment, every person on Earth felt the exact same thing, and it wasn't fear. It wasn't defeat. It was a feeling the Volari had never seen in any of the countless worlds they'd conquered. It was pure, unadulterated rage. A cold, quiet fury that settled deep in their bones. 12 hours ticked by. Earth sent no message of surrender. The Volari started landing their soldiers in every major city, fully expecting the frightened little primates to bow down. Instead, they were met with a population that just stared back, their faces blank and their mouths shut. The alien commander, Krelvac, filed his report. The planet was being pacified with almost no resistance. The humans were complying. He decided not to mention the deeply unsettling feeling he got walking the streets. He left out the part about how the humans watched his troops, their eyes holding a look he couldn't quite decipher. He never mentioned the chilling silence that would swallow a room whole the moment he walked in. And he really should have, because the humans watching him weren't broken. They were observing, analyzing, and waiting. The Galactic Council was confident the Earth problem was solved. They figured Earth would just fall in line, another quiet little member of their vast civilization, its people working and paying their dues just like countless species before them. After 12,000 years of history, they thought they knew everything about conquering young races. They were dead wrong. And in just 1 year, they were about to get a lesson they'd never forget. 13 months after their invasion, the Galactic Council got its standard progress report from the Volari occupation force on Earth. The report was brief and dull, which was exactly what they wanted to see. Human productivity? Acceptable. Resource shipments? Ahead of schedule. Acts of resistance? Dropped to almost nothing. The planet was fully integrated. The Council stamped the report, filed it away, and immediately forgot Earth existed. They had bigger fish to fry, trade wars brewing between merchant clans and border squabbles out on the galactic rim. Just the everyday paperwork of running an empire of 1,000,000 worlds. But if they'd bothered to look, really look at that report, they might have seen something deeply unsettling. The resistance hadn't just dwindled, it had vanished completely, all at once. Every single species the Council had ever brought into the fold showed a slow, steady decline in resistance that took years. But the humans? They just stopped fighting, as if a switch had been flipped overnight. Not one council member ever wondered why. Back on Earth, the answer was hiding in the darkness deep underground. The old Moscow subway tunnels, left to rot for 30 years, were now teeming with 2,000 souls, all working around the clock in 3 shifts. They called themselves the Foundation, a name that was never spoken aloud or written down. Their leader was General Yuri Vulov, a 73-year-old man who'd survived 3 wars and buried 2 wives. He had a shock of silver hair, ice-blue eyes, and a strategic mind that was always 10 steps ahead. When the invasion hit, Vulov was in a command bunker, staring at missile defense screens that were utterly useless against a threat from orbit. He watched his country's cities burn. He saw the Valari soldiers land in terrifyingly perfect formations. And he understood, faster than almost anyone, that fighting back the old way was just a fancy form of suicide. So, he gave the order, go dark. He sent every soldier, scientist, and engineer he could contact deep underground. They grabbed what they could carry and vanished into the labyrinth beneath the frozen Russian soil. 6 months later, he sent out a single coded message to every resistance cell on the planet. The message was just one word: wait. And so, humanity waited. In a repurposed factory basement outside Berlin, Dr. Anaka Weiss and her team were hunched over a piece of Valari armor, salvaged by a young man who gave his life to get it. The metal was impossibly light and impossibly strong, defying everything they knew about physics. Anaka burned through 4 diamond-tipped saws and 2 industrial laser cutters over 3 agonizing months, just trying to shave off a sample to study. When she finally found the precise frequency that made the material give way, she broke down and cried. Not with joy, but with a sudden, bone-deep understanding. The Valari weren't gods. They were just people who had better toys, and toys can be copied. 6,000 kilometers away, tucked inside a cave system under the mountains of northern India, a 24-year-old engineer named Priya Sharma was losing her mind over a Valari shield generator. Her team had captured it in a raid that cost 11 lives. Priya had sworn to the dead that their sacrifice wouldn't be for nothing. The generator was a thing of beautiful, deadly complexity. It projected an energy field that shrugged off everything humanity could throw at it. Bullets, bombs, even nuclear blasts just washed over it. Valari soldiers strolled through human cities wrapped in these shields, laughing at the useless attempts to stop them. Priya took the device apart, screw by tiny screw, mapping every single component. For 6 weeks straight, she barely slept more than 4 hours a night. The pounds melted off her frame, and her hair started to fall out from the crushing stress. But she pushed on, because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the 11 people who had died to bring her that machine. Then, on the 43rd day, she found it. A microscopic flicker in the shield's harmonic frequency, one that happened like clockwork every 1.7 seconds. It lasted for less than a millisecond, but it was there, a crack in the armor, a single moment of absolute vulnerability. Priya encrypted her discovery in a code only General Vulov could decipher and handed it to a network of messengers who traveled by foot to stay off the grid. 2 months after that, the very first human-made shield disruptors started rolling off an assembly line in a hidden factory beneath Sao Paulo, built in the crater where 3 million people had died. But not all the breakthroughs came from a lab. In what used to be Oklahoma, a 16-year-old girl named Maya Chen stumbled onto something huge by pure chance. Before the invasion, she was a ham radio geek, building transmitters in her garage. Now, she was huddled in a storm cellar with her grandma, using her jury-rigged gear to spy on Volari communications. For major announcements, the Volari used faster-than-light signals, but for everyday chatter between soldiers, they just used regular radio waves. Maya listened for months, soaking up their language until she was fluent. She had a gift for it. She spoke 3 languages before the invasion. Now she spoke a 4th. One night, she heard something strange. Every single time a Volari ship was about to enter or leave the atmosphere, there was a quick burst of static on one specific frequency. She tracked it for weeks. The static always crackled to life exactly 3.2 seconds before the ship's engines flared. She wrote it all down and passed the note to a resistance contact, who passed it to another until it finally landed in the hands of a former NASA engineer hiding out in the Appalachian Mountains. He knew instantly what it meant. The Volari FTL drives had a warm-up sequence, and during that sequence, they were wide open to interference. If you could hit them with the right radio frequency at that exact moment, the drive would simply fail to engage. The ship wouldn't blow up or fall out of the sky. It just wouldn't be able to go anywhere. It took another 3 months to weaponize that knowledge, but soon enough, secret factories all over the planet began churning out devices that could ground any Volari ship that came within range. On the surface, life under the occupation droned on. Volari patrols marched through the streets of every major city. Human laborers clocked in at Volari-owned factories. Earth's resources were stripped and shipped off-world to feed the ever-growing Dominion. Everything looked exactly like it was supposed to. But the Volari commanders started noticing tiny things that didn't quite make sense. Production quotas at the human factories were met perfectly. Not a single unit over, not a single unit under. Exactly on the dot, every single day. That should have been statistically impossible. Simple human error should have caused some variation. But the numbers were flawless. Too flawless. The human workers were never late. They did their jobs. They went home. They never complained, never argued, never caused any trouble at all. But they also never did an ounce of extra work. They followed every order with absolute robotic precision and nothing more. Soldiers on patrol noted that humans didn't scurry away in fear anymore. They would just step aside, their eyes calm and unreadable, watching them pass. For some of the soldiers, that quiet, blank stare was more terrifying than open rebellion. The commander, Kavax, brushed off these reports. He figured it was just the jitters of young soldiers who weren't used to peacekeeping duty. He told himself this was just how this particular species showed submission. He had no idea about the secret cities humming with activity in the tunnels beneath Moscow, Berlin, and 100 other places. He had no idea about the hidden factories and caves and basements, building weapons his own people couldn't even conceive of. He had no idea about the network of couriers, traveling on foot and by bicycle, completely invisible to his advanced surveillance. He had no idea that every single human who walked past his patrols was a spy, counting soldiers, memorizing their routes, and noting what kind of weapons they carried. They were identifying which soldiers were sharp and which ones had gotten lazy and complacent. He had no idea that humanity hadn't surrendered. It had just gone silent while it sharpened its claws. Deep in his underground headquarters, General Vulov looked over the final status reports coming in from cells all across the globe. They had enough shield disruptors for every single combat team. They had FTL jammers covering every enemy landing zone. They had captured and reverse-engineered enough Volari weapons to arm a new army. They had mapped every patrol, every supply convoy, every communication hub the enemy relied on. But most importantly, they had their people, millions of them, Farmers, teachers, and accountants who had spent 13 long months playing the part of a broken people, all while secretly training for war. They weren't soldiers, not professional ones anyway, but they were furious, and they were ready. Vulov glanced at the calendar on his wall. Tomorrow was the one-year anniversary of the day the cities burned. It felt right. He keyed his radio and spoke the words that would ignite a world. All cells, all stations, Operation Midnight Sun is a go. Commence at midnight, local time. He paused. May God forgive us for what we're about to do. Across the planet, in hidden tunnels, basements, and forgotten bunkers, what was left of humanity heard the call. They checked their weapons one last time. They hugged the people they loved. They whispered prayers to whatever gods they had left. And then they started climbing toward the surface, toward an enemy that thought they were broken, and toward the fight they had waited 13 long months to start. The Valfari occupation force went to bed that night feeling secure and comfortable. They had no idea it would be their last night on Earth. The first alien outpost to vanish was a supply depot deep in the Canadian North. The assault began at the stroke of midnight, just as General Vulov had commanded. 47 human fighters melted out of the forest. Their weapons were fitted with shield disruptors, a genius invention designed by Priya Sharma in a cave 6,000 kilometers away. The Valfari guards didn't even have a chance to sound an alarm. Their personal shields just winked out of existence 3 seconds before the first shots hit them. By the time they figured out what was happening, it was already over. The whole outpost was secured in under 4 minutes. Not a single distress call got out. The humans made sure of it. 12 time zones away, the exact same scene played out near Moscow, then Berlin, then Tokyo, then Sydney, and then in Mumbai, right in the shadow of the crater where 3 million people had died a year ago. The attacks were perfectly synchronized. Each one hit precisely at midnight in its own time zone, meaning the wave of liberation rolled across the planet like the Earth's own shadow. The Valfari High Command didn't even notice something was wrong for almost 2 hours. Their communications grid was so vast that a few missed routine check-ins was just considered static. By the time they finally realized something catastrophic was unfolding, it was far too late. Commander Vexrath was the top Valfari officer on Earth. He was asleep in his quarters at the main occupation headquarters, a massive complex that used to be the United Nations in New York, when his aide crashed through the door. "Commander, we've lost contact with 37 outposts." Vexrath sat bolt upright, confused. "An equipment failure? All at once?" "No, sir. We're getting reports of weapons fire from the bases we can still reach. The humans, they're attacking everywhere, all at the same time." For the first time in decades of decorated military service, Vexrath felt something cold crawl up his spine. Fear. He scrambled for the command center, not even bothering to change out of his sleeping clothes. The tactical display was a complete nightmare. Red lights blinked across the map, marking lost or embattled positions. There were hundreds of them, spreading across every single continent like a plague. Human forces were hitting supply depots, comms towers, vehicle pools, and barracks. It was like they knew exactly where to hit and precisely when the defenses would be at their weakest. "How is this possible?" Vexrath yelled. "Our surveillance saw nothing. No troop movements, no communications, nothing." "We don't know, sir. It appears the humans organized all of this without using any tech we can track." "Then use what you can," Vexrath roared. "Send reinforcements to the major garrisons. Call in orbital strikes on any large group of enemy forces." "Sir, our orbital platforms aren't responding." "What do you mean they're not responding?" "I mean they're up there, sir. We can see them, but they won't answer our hails or execute any commands." 800 kilometers above the Earth, a completely different kind of fight was underway. The Valfari Orbital Command Station housed 500 crew members and enough firepower to turn a continent to glass. It was the key to their control of the planet. As long as the station was in Valfari hands, any human uprising could be wiped out from orbit, and that's exactly why General Vulov had made it the #1 target. The assault team was made up of just 12 humans who had spent 6 months training for this impossible mission. They had slipped into orbit on a captured Valfari shuttle, flown by a former astronaut who had taught himself to fly alien ships by studying crashed wreckage. They neared the station broadcasting friendly ID codes that had been stolen by Maya Chen and her secret network of radio hobbyists. The station's security systems just saw a routine supply ship asking for permission to dock. They gave it without a second thought. The 12 humans slipped into the station through the cargo bay. They moved down the corridors carrying weapons they had built themselves, weapons designed to punch right through Valfari armor now that they understood its fatal flaws. They took out the crew quickly and quietly, room by room, hallway by hallway. It took them 47 minutes to fight their way to the command center. The station commander died trying to send a warning to the fleet, his last words cut off by a bullet from a gun that wasn't supposed to exist. The leader of the assault team, a woman named Sarah Okonkwo, who had lost her entire family in the Chicago attack, dropped into the main control console. She had spent 8 months memorizing how to operate Valfari systems from captured tech. Now, she put all that training to work. First, she locked out all communications from the surface. Then, she aimed every single weapon on the station at the Valfari fleet hanging in high orbit. The ships never had a chance. Their shields were down, their crews asleep or off duty. The station's weapons ripped through them like they were made of paper. In the first 60 seconds, Sarah vaporized 9 warships and crippled 15 more. The surviving ships broke formation, scattering in panic, trying to escape and figure out what was happening. A few managed to get their shields up. Some tried to fire back, but Sarah had already planned for that. She had programmed the station's defenses to form a protective shield around the entire planet. Any ship that tried to get close was met with a storm of overwhelming firepower. Down on the surface, Vexrath could only watch as his fleet died in the sky above him. He could see the explosions through the window of his command center, bright, silent flashes that lit up the night like newborn star. His entire support network was being wiped out, piece by piece. "Get me Ambassador Krelvax," he ordered. "Get me the Council. Get me anyone who can send help." "Sir, all long-range communications are being jammed. We can't reach anyone outside this system." Maya Chen had figured out how to do that too. Her network had placed faster-than-light jammers at every possible point where a Valfari ship might try to send a signal. The Sol system was now completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Earth was alone with its invaders, and the invaders were losing. The ground war was a 3-day inferno. Human forces attacked relentlessly, without mercy, and with none of the fear the Valfari had expected from a primitive species. They fought with weapons reverse-engineered from Valfari designs, used shields built from stolen tech, and employed tactics no one in the galaxy had ever seen. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like every single battle was personal. Because for them, it was. Every fighter in the human resistance had lost someone in the initial invasion. Parents, children, friends, lovers. They carried those names with them into every fight. They whispered them before they pulled the trigger. They screamed them as they charged positions that should have been impossible to take. Vexrath tried to rally a defense, but his armies were scattered and disoriented. The humans seemed to know where every one of his units was, where every supply dump was hidden, which roads were safe, and which were death traps. They had spent a year doing nothing but watching and learning. Now, they were using that knowledge with brutal efficiency. On the second day, human forces managed to capture 2 perfectly intact Valfari warships that had been forced to make emergency landings. Engineers who had never even seen a spaceship up close figured out how to fly them in a matter of hours. By nightfall, Those same ships were flying missions against their former owners. On the third day, Vexrath got the news. His headquarters was completely surrounded. The humans controlled every road in and out. Reinforcements couldn't get in. Retreat was not an option. He had 10,000 soldiers left, trapped in a building that was quickly running out of power, food, and water. A human officer approached under a white flag. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with faint burn scars on one side of her face and eyes that held no hate, only a deep, profound exhaustion. She delivered a simple message: surrender now, and your soldiers will be treated humanely. You will be given food, water, and medical care, and eventually a way off this planet. If you keep fighting, we will show you the exact same mercy you showed Mumbai, Sao Paulo, and Chicago. Vexrath stared at the young woman for a long time. He thought of his own soldiers, many of them just kids who had been promised an easy tour on a backward planet and had walked into a nightmare. He thought about the intelligence reports describing human prisoner camps, where captured Valfari were being given clean beds and 3 meals a day, treatment that broke every rule of war he'd ever been taught. He thought about what the Council would do when they learned that a species that hadn't even achieved interstellar travel had defeated the mighty Valfari Dominion. Then he gave the order to surrender. The humans didn't cheer. There was too much to do, too many of their own to bury, and a whole world to rebuild. But that night, for the first time in over a year, people looked up at the stars without being afraid. The orbital station, now firmly in human hands, began broadcasting a message on every frequency the galaxy used. Translated into every language the Valfari had taught them, the message was simple. This is Earth. We were attacked without cause. We have defended ourselves. To the Galactic Council, we say this: we do not want war. We just want to be left alone. Do not send more ships. Do not send more soldiers. Earth is not for the taking. Respect this boundary, and we will have peace. Cross it, and you will learn what the Valkyrie learned. We are a people who do not surrender. We are a people who never forget. The message ended, offering coordinates for a diplomatic meeting, should the Council dare to accept. Then the humans went back to rebuilding their shattered world, their eyes on the stars, waiting to see what would come next. And far away, in a chamber among dead stars, that message hit the Galactic Council like a bomb at a silent auction. No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Council had no rule book for this. The Galactic Council chamber had weathered countless storms in its long history. It had seen wars between member species, plagues that had sterilized entire worlds, and supernovas that had redrawn the cosmic map. But never, in all that time, had the chamber fallen into a silence this deep, this absolute. The High Speaker, a being of living light, floated in the center of the hall, her glow noticeably dimmed, as if she couldn't comprehend the news. Around her, 847 representatives sat frozen, their minds reeling. The mighty Valari Dominion hadn't just been beaten, they'd been routed, humiliated, and chased off a planet by a species that shouldn't have been able to dent their armor. The message from Earth replayed on every screen in the hall, that eerily calm human voice laying out the terms of their victory. Ambassador Krelvac stood before them all, his normally gray skin now a sickly pale white with shame. He'd barely escaped on the very last shuttle off-world, just moments before human soldiers stormed the spaceport. He had lost absolutely everything: his fleet, his ground troops, and his honor. "How?" the High Speaker finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "How is this possible?" Krelvac couldn't bring himself to look at her. "We underestimated them, High Speaker. We saw their primitive tools and assumed they had primitive minds. We were wrong. Representative Jaxval of the merchant clans shot up from his seat, his voice cutting through the silence like glass. Wrong? You lost 47 capital warships to a species that's never even left its own moon. You lost an entire orbital station to 12 soldiers with handheld weapons. You weren't wrong, Ambassador. You were incompetent. The High Speaker tried to intervene. Representative Jaxval, please. No, the Dominion promised us an easy conquest. They promised us resources, labor, a new jewel for the Council's crown. Instead, they've handed us a galactic embarrassment. That message from Earth is being blasted on every frequency. Every species can hear it. Every developing world is listening to the story of how the powerful Volari were sent running by farmers and teachers with stolen guns. The chamber immediately exploded into chaos. Alliances that had stood for centuries began to crack as factions turned on one another. The Volari demanded the Council back a massive counterattack. The merchant clans demanded to be compensated for their lost investments. And dozens of smaller species just wanted to know what on earth was going to happen next. The High Speaker raised a hand made of pure light, and a fragile quiet settled over the hall. We need to handle this with extreme care. The humans have asked for a diplomatic meeting. They say they want peace. Maybe we should hear them out. Listen to them? Admiral Vorketh of the Hegemony Fleet stepped forward. His people were warriors, much like the Volari, but far older and far deadlier. His fleet was the fist that enforced the Council's will. High Speaker, with all due respect, if we negotiate with these humans, we send a message to every young species in the galaxy. We tell them that the Council's authority is a suggestion, not a law. We tell them that violence gets them a seat at the table. We cannot let that idea take root. Then what is your proposal, Admiral? Vorketh's reply was chillingly simple. I have a battle fleet ready to deploy. 12 dreadnoughts, each one with the power to crack a planet in half. I propose we travel to Earth and give these humans a demonstration of what happens when you defy the Council. A wave of approval washed through parts of the chamber. It was a simple, brutal solution. Crush the rebellion, restore order, and move on. It had always worked before, but not everyone was so sure. In a quiet corner of the hall, where the most ancient species resided, a being named Phela slowly rose to speak. Her people, the Viscari, were one of the founding members of the Council from 12,000 years ago. They rarely spoke in these debates anymore, preferring to observe and remember. But Phela had noticed something in the human message that deeply concerned her. If I may have a word, High Speaker. A profound silence fell, a show of respect that seemed to surprise even the younger members. Phela was nearly 800 years old, one of the most ancient living beings in the galaxy. When she spoke, everyone listened. I have been studying the transmissions from Earth, Phela said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner. I have watched how these humans fought, how they organized themselves, how they adapted. She paused, her ancient eyes sweeping across the assembly. Do you know what I see when I look at them? Nobody dared to answer. I see us. I see who we were 12,000 years ago, before we built this council, before we learned to use words instead of weapons. She turned her gaze directly to Admiral Vorketh. I remember, Admiral, even if you have forgotten. I remember what it felt like to be a young species, driven by anger and fear and the raw will to survive. I remember the terrible wars we fought before we found a better way. Vorketh shifted on his feet. With respect, Elder, that was a very long time ago. The galaxy is different now. Is it? These humans lost 37 million of their people in the first hours of the invasion. They watched 3 of their largest cities burn to the ground, and instead of surrendering, they spent a year planning their revenge. Does that sound like a species that will simply accept defeat, Admiral? Does that sound like a species that will kneel because you threaten them? It sounds, Vorketh snapped back, like a species that needs to be put in its place. Fella shook her head, a slow, sad gesture. No, it sounds like us. And if we go to Earth with warships and deliver ultimatums, the only lesson we will teach them is that we are their enemy. We will not end this conflict. We will ignite a war that could burn for generations. One primitive planet cannot threaten this council, Vorketh scoffed. One planet cannot, Fella agreed. But what about 10 or 50? What about all the other young worlds out there who are hearing Earth's message right now and learning for the first time that the Council is not invincible? Fella turned back to the entire assembly. The humans have done something far more dangerous than just defeating the Volari. They have unleashed an idea, the idea that resistance is possible, that young species don't have to quietly accept our rule, that there is another path. The chamber was silent once more, but this time it was a silence of dawning horror. Representative Jaxval spoke, his voice barely a whisper. You're saying that if we destroy Earth, we turn them into martyrs, and martyrs can be far more dangerous than enemies. I'm saying we have a choice, Fella replied. We can try to stamp out this fire with force and risk watching the embers spread across the entire galaxy. Or we can do something we haven't done in 12,000 years. We can admit that our way might not be the only way. We can meet these humans as equals, not as subjects. We can change. Admiral Vorketh let out a bitter laugh. Change the very foundation of galactic society because one backwater planet got lucky? That's insane. Is it? Fella offered a thin smile, revealing teeth that were still sharp. Tell me, Admiral, if someone had tried to conquer your ancestors by force, what would they have done? Would they have surrendered peacefully, or would they have fought until the last of their warriors had fallen? Vorketh opened his mouth, then shut it. He had no answer, because he knew exactly what his ancestors would have done. They would have fought. Just like the humans. The high speaker allowed the silence to hang in the air before she spoke. I propose a compromise. We will send a diplomatic mission to Earth, just as the humans requested. The mission will be escorted by Admiral Vorketh's fleet, in case the humans turn out to be hostile. But that fleet will not fire unless fired upon. We will go there to talk. We will listen. And we will not make any decisions until we truly understand who these humans are. Nobody was truly happy with the decision. The Volari still screamed for revenge. The merchants still wanted their money back. Admiral Vorketh still wanted to show the galaxy the price of defiance, and Fella wanted a future most in the chamber couldn't even grasp. But it was the decision that was made. 2 weeks later, the hegemony fleet tore through the fabric of space and arrived in the Sol system. 12 dreadnoughts, each so massive they were visible from the surface of Earth like new, terrifying moons, arranged themselves in a brutal display of overwhelming force. Trailing behind them was the diplomatic ship, a much smaller vessel carrying delegates from 30 different species. Down on Earth, what was left of humanity watched them come, with their hands on their weapons and a cold fear in their hearts. The last year had cost them so much. So many lives lost, so many cities still nothing but rubble. They had beaten the Volari, yes, but this new fleet was 10 times bigger and 100 times more powerful. General Volkov, now the acting chairman of the United Planetary Defense Council, received the transmission requesting permission to land diplomats. He spoke with leaders from every nation, every resistance cell, every single group that had bled to win back their world. The answer they sent back was a shock to everyone, most of all to themselves. Permission granted. Imagine an alien empire, thousands of years old, showing up at your doorstep. They don't say hello. They just opened fire, wiping out 37 million people in the blink of an eye. Then, after you manage to fight them off in a bloody year-long war, they have the nerve to say, "Let's talk." Would you take that meeting? Well, humanity did. And what happened next would change the galaxy forever. They met in Geneva, in a building that had once been a symbol of peace. Now, it was a graveyard. Its walls were cracked, its windows blown out, its halls still scarred from the alien bombardment. The humans picked this spot for a reason. They wanted the Galactic Council to sit in the rubble the Valari had made. Earth sent a team of 12, one person from each major region of the Resistance. General Vulov led them, his hair turned snow white from the stress of the war. Next to him was Priya Sharma, the brilliant engineer whose breakthrough saved them all. And then there was Maya Chen. She was just a teenager when she cracked the alien communications network. Now, at 19, she had a quiet confidence that made her seem decades older. The council's group was much bigger, 30 representatives from 30 different species, all of them dripping with power and ancient wisdom. There was Admiral Vorketh, a mountain of a creature who could barely squeeze through the human-sized doors. Elder Thalora was there, the voice of the oldest species in the galaxy, her ancient eyes missing nothing. Leading them was Ambassador Zixtel, a being made of living crystal who had negotiated more treaties than humanity had fought wars. They gathered in the main assembly hall around a massive table. On one side, human chairs. On the other, a bizarre collection of seats for alien bodies. Through the shattered windows, you could see the enemy dreadnoughts just hanging there in the sky, a clear and silent threat. Ambassador Zixtel spoke first, his voice sounding like wind chimes in a hurricane. "We come in peace, General Vulov. The Council wants to understand what happened and find a way forward for everyone." Vulov just nodded, his face like stone. "We appreciate you talking to us, but you need to understand something. A year ago, your council's people killed 37 million of our men, women, and children without any warning. Peace isn't a word you say, it's something you have to prove." Zixtel's crystals shimmered. "The actions of the Valari were regrettable." "Regrettable?" Priya Sharma's voice cut through the air like glass. "My mother died in Mumbai, my father, my 2 little sisters, 3 million people in a city that did nothing to you. Is regrettable really the word you want to use for genocide?" Admiral Vorketh shifted, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he wasn't allowed to carry. The humans had made sure everyone came in unarmed. An old being named Elder Fella raised a calming hand. "The young human is right to be angry. We can't downplay what happened. The Valari broke the most sacred rules of our council. They treated your people like animals to be caged, not beings with rights. For that, there is no apology big enough. All we can offer is accountability." "What kind of accountability?" Vulov demanded. Zixtel explained, "The Valari will face sanctions. Their authority to integrate new worlds is gone forever. They will pay reparations for the damage, and their ambassador, Krelvax, will be handed over to you to be put on trial by humans if you want him." The humans looked at each other, stunned. This was way more than they'd ever hoped for. But Vulov wasn't done. "And what about next time? What stops another one of your members from deciding we look like an easy target?" Ambassador Zixtel leaned forward, his crystal body glowing. "That is why we're here. The Council wants to offer Earth full membership. With all the rights and protections that come with it, no member can attack another. Your world would be safe. In return, you would follow Council laws and join our efforts." He continued, "You'd open up trade. You'd share your technology and we'd share ours." It was an incredible offer. Most species would have jumped at the chance, But Vulov had learned the hard way that the Council's gifts always came with strings attached. "What about the other species like us?" he asked. "The other young worlds you're integrating as we speak?" Zixtel paused. "I don't understand the question." "Oh, I think you do," Vulov shot back. "Your council has been conquering young species for 12,000 years. You call it integration. We call it theft. You find worlds that can't defend themselves, and you take everything. Our question is, what happens to them if we join your club?" Admiral Vorketh's voice boomed for the first time. "Integration brings young species into civilization safely. Without our guidance, they might destroy themselves or become a threat." Vulov's eyes narrowed. "The way we became a threat to you?" Vorketh went silent. Elder Fella leaned forward. "You are asking the right questions, General. Questions many of us have been too afraid to ask for a very long time. The truth is, integration wasn't supposed to be like this. When the Council started, we helped young species because they needed it. But somewhere along the way," she continued, "we started helping ourselves. We took their resources, their freedom, and we told ourselves we were doing them a favor." Vulov was genuinely shocked. "You're admitting this?" "I'm very old, General," she said. "I've learned that ignoring a painful truth doesn't make it go away. Your people forced us to look in the mirror for the first time in centuries, and some of us are horrified by what we see." The negotiations dragged on for 3 days. They argued about trade, borders, reparations, and defense. They were two civilizations from different ends of the galaxy, trying to build a bridge over a massive gulf of history and blood. But the real turning point, the big reveal, came on the second night. Maya Chen had been mostly silent, just listening. But when the conversation turned to communication networks, she finally spoke. "Your message from Earth," she said calmly, "has already been received by 47 other young species. I know because I've been listening to their chatter. They're talking about us. They're asking questions. And some of them, they're already starting their own resistance movements." The council members looked at each other in absolute panic. This was their worst nightmare come true. "You see?" Admiral Vorketh roared. "This is why we can't show weakness. If we give in to Earth, every primitive world will think they can rebel." But Maya just looked at him and said, "Or you could give them what they really want. The same thing we wanted. The chance to grow up on their own, at their own speed, without an empire forcing them into a mold." "That would mean changing everything about how the Council works," Zixtel whispered. "Yes," Maya said with a small smile. "It would." The final deal was signed on the 3rd day, broadcast across the entire galaxy. Earth would join the Council not as a conquered planet, but as an equal. In return, Earth would help create a new way to interact with young species, one that offered help without conquest and protection without control. They called it the Chen Protocol, named after the 19-year-old girl who changed the galaxy by doing what no one else had bothered to do. Listen. As everyone was leaving, Elder Fella walked over to General Vulov. She was so old, every one of her 800 years seemed etched on her face. "You've changed everything, you know," she said. "We just wanted to survive," Vulov replied, looking out at the ruins of his city. "That's how all great change begins," she said softly. "With the simple, desperate need to survive." She put a gentle hand on his arm. "I was there when my people first went to the stars. We were a lot like you, scared, angry, but so determined. We made so many mistakes, but we also built something that lasted 12,000 years. Now, you're going to help us build something better." "You think we can?" he asked. "I think you already have," she replied. "The real question is what you do next." She gave him a smile that showed ancient sharp teeth. "Don't let the galaxy change you, General. make sure you're the one changing the galaxy." She turned and walked away. Outside, people were coming out of the shelters, looking up at the alien ships as they finally began to leave. Kids pointed at the sky, their fear slowly turning into wonder. Parents hugged each other, crying with relief, with hope, and with grief for everything they'd lost. Maya Chen stood in the crowd, staring at the stars that no longer seemed so scary. Priya Sharma was already on her way back to the lab, her mind buzzing with ideas for new technologies. And all over the planet, billions of people were learning a powerful lesson. They weren't alone in the universe, and being not alone didn't have to mean being a victim. General Vulov stepped over a pile of rubble, taking a long pull of air, still thick with the ghost of smoke. A news correspondent rushed up to him, mic extended. "General, a statement?" Vulov paused, his mind flashing back through the last year. The shock of the invasion, the crushing occupation, the silent year of planning right under their noses, the bloody battles, the friends they'd lost. And now this. A place among the stars, bought and paid for with grit and sacrifice, and the simple, stubborn refusal of mankind to lie down and die. "We started with nothing," he said, his voice raspy. "No starships, no advanced weapons, no idea what we were up against. They sized us up and decided we were just animals. They were sure we would break." He glanced up at the enemy fleet, now just glittering specks shrinking in the sky. They were wrong. And now, we get to make sure no one else has to go through what we did. The reporter asked, "So what's next, General?" For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a real smile touched Vulov's lips. "Next, we rebuild, we learn, we get stronger, and we make damn sure that the next time some galactic bully looks at a young world and sees an easy victim, they remember the mistake the last guys made with Earth." He turned and walked back toward the building where humanity's future in the galaxy was just beginning. High above, the last of the council ships streaked into hyperspace, carrying the tale of their impossible victory to a million other systems. And on those worlds, in the quiet corners where other young races dreamed of looking up, a new kind of hope began to grow. The galaxy had been put on notice. Humanity was just getting warmed up.